Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to another episode of On the Couch with Creatives. I say good morning because I'm here in the UK, but good afternoon or good evening if you're anywhere else in the world. I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Julie Hyde-Muse.
And this is On the Couch with Creatives. Fans and followers of the show will know by now that we're part of the Creatives Group, a private network for creative professionals everywhere. Together, we help to connect you with like-minded individuals, help you create at your best, and therefore help you to grow and develop your creative business. If that sounds like a good idea to you and you'd like to find out more about joining the growing number of creative professionals within our network, please do contact us after the show and we'll be delighted to talk to you. But this is On the Couch. So Julie, who do we have on the couch today?
We are today talking to Walter S. Zapotocznny, and he is an award-winning author. He concentrates on military history. He has 11 books and 150 published articles under his belt. He's a former military historian with the US Army, and he specializes in Holocaust studies and events that transcend states, regions, and cultures. So we're crossing over to Pennsylvania now and getting Walter on the couch. So hello, Walter. Thank you for joining us all the way from Pennsylvania.
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, we're really interested in hearing what you do because you are an author, obviously, a military historian, and you write books on military history. Now, start from the very beginning. What made you interested in writing this genre? What interested you about the military, about conflict?
Well, this really goes back to when I was very young, and I found out what my parents had done during World War II. My father served with General Patton's army. When he was very young, he was able to, or they visited some concentration camps, and he really didn't want to talk about it too much. And after the war, when I was growing up, but I found out more about what he did after he'd passed. We found records. And my mother was an air raid warden during the war, and she wrote to service members who did not have any families. So, this all interested me from a very young age, and I started watching movies and reading books about the war. But I really didn't get into the idea of writing anything until later, when I was doing undergraduate work, and it was actually Colin Heaton, who was one of my professors. I took a class, a class about the Holocaust that he was running, and the whole idea and the way he presented it was just fascinating to me. And so I wrote a paper about the Einsatzgruppen, and he nominated it for a great paper, listing in university. And I started thinking, well, maybe I can write something here, And then I just start researching more and more and more. And then when I went to the Sergeant's Major Academy, the United States Sergeant's Major Academy out in El Paso, Texas, they require a lot of writing. And I started to get some pretty good feedback. And I said, well, maybe I'll do something here. So that's what kind of gave me the idea to start. And I was always interested in military history. Of course, I was in the military, and I ended up my career in the military as the command historian of the 28th Infantry Division. So kept on writing as ideas came up. I just tried to formulate them. And I like to write about things that a lot of people don't know much about. And if you look at my book list, you'll see that some of these topics, I didn't even know anything about them until I started researching them. And I figured if I didn't know, then a lot of people didn't know, because I knew quite a bit about military history. So that's how it got started and started evolving.
You've got you have 11 books under your belt and a lot to do with the Second World War. And it's quite amazing what you said earlier, that so many people who fought in that war never really spoke about it. And even the victims of the Holocaust, they only started speaking about it in the last few years because they suddenly realized, well, we're dying off now from old age. And if we don't get our stories out, that our narrative, the true narrative, is just going to die with her.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And with my father's experience, I realized that. And one of the things I did right before I left the military was get involved with the U.S. Congress Veterans History Program. And what we did is we did oral interviews of veterans, and it just, I did a number of them, and they became part of the permanent record in Congress. And it's just fascinating because just about every one of them at the end of the interview come up to me and said, "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell my story." They really had never done it before. Whether, the setting wasn't right, they just didn't want to talk about it, whatever the case was, but it kind of worked. And we got some pretty good stories out of it. And we got, most of those ones I interviewed have since passed, but now it's a record, and their family members and researchers and whomever else wants to look at it can get a sense of what they did during the war, whether they served in combat or whether they did like my mother and others, so many others did at home on the home front, keeping the home front going.
Mm. Yeah, and that's that you do hear some wonderful, real heart-wrenching stories from people who wrote letters to servicemen and just kept them going and kept the spirit alive and kept the hope alive. And for somebody of my generation, I can't imagine what it must be like. And thankfully, I've been born into the West, where my life hasn't been touched by war, and I can't imagine what it must be like to live through that kind of conflict, because I imagine for a lot of servicemen and Jewish people from the Holocaust telling their stories a bit later on, a lot of that would probably be due to post-traumatic stress disorder. They're not going to be able to tell their stories straight away because it's just the horror is just too great.
Yes, and we tried to be very sensitive to that when we did the interviews and formulate the questions in such a way that you kind of eased into the story, and you can pretty much tell if they didn't want to get into a certain aspect of it, and we didn't go there, but wanted to learn as much as we could about them and their service.
There were so many just disgusting atrocities that the Nazis committed during the Second World War, and one of your books, which I find very interesting, is called Beyond Duty: The Reason Some Soldiers Commit Atrocities. Can you just give us a little bit of an overview of what you discovered?
Sure. I started thinking about atrocities a little more deeply after I wrote that paper I mentioned before about the Ansatzgruppen. And then I started reading a little bit about the Japanese and what they had done in Nanking in 1937. And then I came across the incident at Nogonri in Korea with the American soldiers had fired on civilians, and I'm thinking, I wonder if there's a correlation here. I wonder if there's some common factors. And so I started looking at it, and I think I was able to discover that there are some common factors in why some soldiers commit atrocities. Of course, there are a very small number who commit atrocities, given the large number of soldiers that are in combat, but yet there are. And a lot of times they've come from not the best family life, not the best education, they've come from a situation of racism, and a number of other factors. And so that's what prompted me to get into that book and to try to identify some of those reasons that some soldiers commit atrocities. There's been a lot of psychological studies done on what motivates soldiers in combat. But I found, at least up to the point of when I wrote that book, that there weren't a lot of studies done on the reasons that they commit the inherent reasons, the deep inside reasons that they commit those atrocities. And that's why I tried to do.
I suppose a lot has to do with them being given permission. But when you are protected, so you can go out and kill and you will not be punished for it. But as you say, the vast majority will say, well, I don't want to go out and kill. So there are those that have that, I don't know, psychopathic leaning or makeup that would say, oh, great, that's wonderful. Now I can go out and do whatever I want.
Yeah, exactly right. As a matter of fact, that book was my first introduction to the publishing industry, because the book before that, the two books before that, we self-published. The division, 20th division that I worked for, published the one, self-published, if you will, and the other one the first book I did, I self-published just to get it out there and to see what would happen. But I wrote that book, and I can tell you a little story about putting my website together and why I did that. But my publisher, who is from Stroud in the UK, Fonthill Media, came across my website, and he saw some things I had written, and contacted me and said, "Do you have anything that you might consider publishing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just happen to be working on this book. I'll send you some of the manuscript." And they liked it, and I've been with them ever since. So, that's kind of how that happened. But I thought it was an interesting topic, and I thought somebody needed to write about it. I've had negative and positive reviews on that book, and like most books. And I think I've accomplished my mission, and that is I get people to think about it and talk about it. Whether you agree with what I wrote or not is really not the issue. The issue is you're talking about it and you're thinking about it. And to me, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and it's an important topic as well, because in society, cross-section society, you do get those pockets of people, not just in the military. You do get some of them obviously do find their way into the military and commit these awful crimes, but you also get these awful psychopathic serial killers who just have no regard for human life, and there's small pockets. You'll find them all over the place, and I think it is interesting to look at the behavioral science, I guess, and the real background of what makes these people do what they do, because I think they're the kind of people that would do those things no matter what, whether they were in the military or whether they were somewhere else, or when they were somewhere else. There's something in them that is making that violence come out in the most horrific ways, whether they need real therapy. I don't know if there's any coming back from that with these people.
Well, there's a school of thought out there, I'm sure you know, that if we wouldn't have law, if we wouldn't have order, a large portion of humanity would fall into that same category. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I certainly don't want to experience it to find out, but there are a lot of people that in the academic field that believe that. So
there's also the other side to it, and you touched on it earlier, where you said a lot of the people who commit atrocities, or soldiers who commit atrocities, a general theme is that they are low education, low intelligence. You know, that a lot of those people were put in the concentration camps in the Second World War as guards, and they just thoroughly enjoyed beating up the prisoners and being in control of them. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Corrie ten Boom, but she wrote the book The Hiding Place, and she and her sister landed up in a concentration camp in Auschwitz, I think. They weren't Jewish, they were Dutch, but they were hiding Jews. And her sister had an enormous amount of compassion, and she talks about a particular incident where this guard, who was probably about 18, 19 years old, just hitting an old lady. She was scrabbling after a potato that had fallen, and he started hitting her with his rifle butt. And Corrie said, oh, poor people. You know, we really have to, after the war, look after these people so that they can heal. And her sister said, yes, that poor guard, we need to do that. And she said, what? And she felt compassion for the guard. Yeah. And she said, you have to understand that in civilian life, he probably would have been a postman or behind a till in a shop. But he's been put in a position of authority over people or people he regards, or is been told to regard as animals. And he knows no better. And he's been brutalized as well as the prisoners. So there's that kind of psychology as well.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And, and I wrote in the book about some of the reasons I mentioned that some people do that, education or lack of it. But even highly educated people can fall into the same ideology trap that allows them to do things. The Einsatzgruppen, the German Einsatzgruppen, is a perfect example of that. I didn't realize this until I started doing the research, and it's just astounding. Most of the leaders, the commanders of those Einsatzgruppen units, were doctors, PhDs. They were lawyers. They were medical in the medical field, highly educated, very successful people. But yet they believe so strongly in that idea, in that Nazi ideal about making it a perfect world and Jews had to go, that they justified doing what they did for the country, for the new Germany, so to speak. So it's interesting. It really is fascinating what motivates people,
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
No. I'm just saying it's fascinating to me what motivates people to do those kinds of things. And that's why I tried to write a little bit about it, spur some discussion, if nothing else.
Yeah, because you get the ones that are low educated and you can make them prison guards or brown shirts, whatever. And then you get those ones who are highly educated, intelligent, and logically think that what they are doing is okay.
Exactly. It's interesting, isn't it?
Do we as human beings maybe, because you get the few that are the real leaders of society, if you like, and the rest of us kind of follow along, and human beings tend to want to follow, I think, quite a lot naturally. So this is what they say when you get these cult leaders, you get a very good orator, somebody like Hitler. He was a very good orator, and he, it scares me to death that you can get one or two madmen, literally, and they can orate and make you feel and believe, and they whip up this frenzy of emotion, and you get swept along with it, and you're almost like brainwashed. So the masses tend to be quite easily brainwashed to a degree, whether it's a religious movement or a cult movement. We saw a lot of cults spring up in the States at a certain point in time, but if you get somebody who is really convincing to stand up and get you to follow that lead, I mean, I don't know if I would. If somebody said something that really spoke to me, maybe I would. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting, and it's not just on the negative side. I mean, where you're sitting, look at Churchill as an example and how he rallied the nation.
Yeah.
And people couldn't wait to turn on his radio address, because you had a sense that, we are going to win this. This is good. And you wanted to hear that. People want to hear that. And they also, in some cases, want to hear negative things too. I mean, just like all of the protests that are occurring in this country right now, whether it be pro or anti-Israel, you subscribe to a certain cause and can believe so strongly in that cause that you're willing to go out on the street and march and carry signs and do even more. I mean, and beat those signs over someone else's head, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Can we get on to the actual publishing of books? Because you mentioned that you self-published your first two, and then that led on to you being picked up by a traditional publisher. So
right.
How did the two experiences happen?
Well, the first book that I worked on was the Chronicles of the 28th Division, and I was asked or tasked by my boss, who I've worked for, the division commander. I had asked to come up to the division headquarters to do some work as the command historian. I had just finished my master's in history at that time, and I knew the division commander from other things we'd done, and so he asked me to do that. And the other thing I was to do was to process the combat reports and after action reports from the various units that were deployed to send those on to the United States Army Center of Military History, because those are the folks that look at all those things and eventually write the books and write criteria for West Point and for the Army War College. So in any event, we did that. And he said, well, why don't you write a little bit about the deployments, the most recent deployments, because there really hadn't been anything written about it. And so I did that, and that was the Chronicles of the 28th Division. And they funded the publishing of that, so that was self-published. And in that same year, I was still working on For the Fatherland, which was the book that kind of spun out of my experience with writing that paper about the Einsatzgruppen and my experience with Colin, And I thought, well, maybe a good way to tell the story would be via a historical fiction venue. And so I did a lot of research, and I wanted to be accurate, and I developed these characters, these three kids that grew up in pre-World War II Nazi Germany, and they were in the Hitler Youth, the Young Hitler Youth, the Jugend, went up through, became SS members, and then on to be Einsatzgruppen, you know, and of course, it's all that aspect of it was fiction, but what happened was true. You know, some people did do that, not those same kids necessarily. And so I wanted to I wanted to tell the story of what happened in more of a way that one could follow characters through. And so I had sent out, I don't even know how many letters to agents and publishers, in most cases, no responses. And my wife and I were talking about, she said, why don't you just self-publish it? You know, just get it out there and do it. And then your kids will have something that they can look at and say, hey, Pap wrote this book, you know. So I did that. And then, like I told you, I had put some things on my website that I had written, and the publishing rep from Fawn Hill Media just fell upon them and asked me if I wanted to publish a book with them, and I've been with them ever since. The reason for the website, I alluded to it earlier. When I was working on for the Fatherland, my wife and I were on a cruise on the Caribbean, and a guy by the name of Ernie Spencer was giving a lecture on on writing one's memoirs on the cruise ship. And I was tired of sitting by the pool, so I said, I'm going to go listen to the lecture. So I listened to it. It was pretty interesting. And I decided I usually don't do this, but I decided to stay after and introduce myself and just tell him that I really enjoyed his lecture, you know. And he said, well, thank you very much. And what are you doing? I said, well, we're on a cruise here and I'm working on a book. He said, really? He said, well, I have a publishing company. If you're interested, I'll take a look at it and we can get back in a couple of days. So I gave him what I had done with the manuscript. He looked at it. We came for lunch a couple of days later, and he said, I like what you're doing here. He said, I'd like to help you. I'd like to mentor you to write this. And he did. He helped me with it. And I said, well, how do you get published? I said, I've sent out emails and letters and I don't get any responses. He says, well, you have to be famous. And he said, you're not famous. I said, well, I know I'm not famous, you know. He said, but all kidding aside, one way to become famous, so to speak, is to make a website, develop a website, and put things on that website that you've written. Be studious about how you develop the keywords, search words, and eventually you'll get a lot of people that will read that, and you'll kind of become famous, you know. Well, you know, now, I mean, I put a lot of things on my website. I get emails, messages every week from students, from people all over the world that would like to, and it's all free. I don't charge anything for it. And they can use whatever I've written, whatever advice they can get out of it. And he's right. I mean, I don't know if famous is the right word, you know what I'm saying? But I get a lot of visibility on that website. And again, that's how the publishing rep found me. So in a way, you know, he was right. You know, you want to be famous, you want to get found, then that's a way to do it, because most of these publishing companies are not going to deal with you unless you have an agent. And most of these agents are so busy, unless something really stands out to them, they're not going to respond to your correspondence. That's how it started.
Because even writing a polite email, thanks but no thanks, takes time and really couldn't be bothered. Yeah,
they're not going to bother.
So people can get a hold of you on your website.
Oh yes, yeah. There's a contact form there they can send, and like I said, every week I get lots of things mostly from students. A lot of it's from students who want to use some of the essays I put on there. And well, how much does it? It doesn't cost anything. You can use whatever you want. Just use the proper citation if you're doing it for a college course or something, or high school. But yeah, it's good, and I like getting that stuff out there.
People pay for your book.
I'm sorry?
I said, obviously, your books are on Amazon and people pay if they want to buy a copy.
Oh, yeah. I have, if you click on my website, if they click on the picture of the book, it'll take them to various places around the world. All book publishers, major book publishers, the books are available. And so they can click on wherever they are and they can purchase the book. Yeah.
Fantastic. It is hard. It is hard. We've interviewed a few authors and trying to trying to get their books published and beating that drum. A lot of them, as you say, have started off self-publishing because that's just the best route to at least get their works out there into the wider world. But if you're a celebrity, no problem. You know, a lady that I met who's quite a famous weather lady over here. She's just started writing. Well, just started. I think she's on her third book now, romance fiction. And a publisher approached her, and she hadn't written a word in her life before. I thought, would you write a book? Well, what would I write about? Don't be ridiculous. Anyway, the conversation went, and she thought, okay, well, I'll give it a go. And it has been quite popular for her. But I remember sitting in the audience thinking, oh, that's a lovely story. And I'm a very positive person, but I was thinking, if I was an author sitting here listening to that, I would be steam coming out of my ears.
Yeah. Well, the other advantage, I think, to self-publishing, it's people. I think it's being looked at a lot differently than it used to be. You know, it used to be looked at as this, you know, somebody wants to write something, get it out there. You know, they're vain. No, it's a way, and if you get enough people reading it and you get enough reviews, it might get some attention. It is a way to get out there and say, look, I have written a book. And if it's well written, well edited, and not some just thing somebody threw together, you know, it will get some attention, hopefully, in the future, you know. So yeah, I mean, I have my publishing reps come to me now and, well, would you consider writing about this, or have you thought about writing about that? And I never thought that I'd ever be in that situation. I mean, I always thought that I have to be approaching them, say, I have this idea, and it's kind of turned around now, you know. It's interesting.
So you're quite famous. Do you find that
infamous, maybe?
Do you find that people who aren't military historians or aren't in the military, but are just interested in history as such, would buy your book? So I'm not in the military, but I am interested in stories from the past, and the World War II specifically interests me. And one of your books interested me, called Hitler's Penal Battalion. And I'm assuming, obviously I haven't read it, but I'm assuming that's about the battalions that looked after the prison and the concentration camps during the Second World War.
Well, some of them did, but the Straf Battalion were, and the Russians did this, by the way, too. But what they did was they were short of men. And so they come to the realization that there's a lot of men in prison. It's manpower. And so they went to them, unless it was very serious, like murder, you know, or rape or very serious crimes. They would go to them and say, look, if you're willing to come and serve, most of the time on the front in very dangerous missions, we'll either commute or reduce your sentence. And of course, yes, I'm in, you know. Well, unfortunately for them, the life expectancy wasn't very high because they were given the very extreme missions. Some of them were put into the concentration camps, but most of them went to the Russian front or something like that, you know.
Well, Putin has done this with the Ukraine conflict today. I mean, they're still doing this.
Yeah.
He threw a lot of prisoners into the Ukraine conflict, and I think a lot joined the Wagner group as well, and have committed the most appalling atrocities,
right?
Raping babies and horrible things. So we're not talking about the creme de la creme, but you have written so many interesting books about conflicts, as you said very much earlier, that nobody's ever heard about.
That's what I try to do. I mean, there's plenty of really good authors, much better than me, that have written about, you know, like D-Day, for instance. I'll just throw that out. I mean, there's a lot of books. I don't even know how many books have been written about D-Day. You know, about the brave efforts of the British Air Force in the Battle of Britain. I mean, a lot of books. You know, so what I try to do is find what's one little piece of that nobody knows anything about, or a few people do, that would be of interest. And the other thing I do is I try to weave some of that back into my history classes that I teach at college, so that the kids they don't get this in high school, you know, elementary school, because it's very broad brush. They don't have a lot of time to talk about it. Even if they take a history, even if they sit there and listen to history, you know, they're only going to get the very basic. So I try to give them a little more meat, if you will, a little more of the story that helps them understand what happened a little bit better.
Do you have any top tips for aspiring military historians? Sorry, let me put it this way: military historians who aspire to become authors.
Excuse me. I would say three things. Number one, research. Make sure that your facts are correct. Double, triple check, because someone's going to be reading it that may know more about it than you do. And you want to be correct. You want to be telling the correct facts. The second thing, and I learned this from that gentleman I told you about that I met on the cruise ship, Ernie Spencer, don't try to write it from the very beginning to the end in one chronology. I don't write like that. I'll write maybe what you might call different chapters at different times, then I'll put it together. Because if I discover a certain thing or information, then I'll write about that. And that may end up being at the front, middle, end of the book. Who knows? I'll worry about that later. But when you have an idea, whether it be you're writing fiction or nonfiction, just write. Don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about punctuation. Don't worry about any of that. That all comes later. That's all part of the editing and review process. Because I think some people, they get stymied because, well, I needed a period there, or the sentence doesn't sound right. Don't worry about that. Just write what you want to write. And then third, I think it's important to have somebody who will give you an honest appraisal to read it. But not necessarily a family member, because they don't, well, okay, it's nice. No, I want somebody to read it that can tell me, yes, this doesn't make any sense, or you really did a good job on this particular section and you should maybe expand that. So those three things I think are important. And it's writing not just for military subjects, but any subject, really.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask this question before we go into our next part of our interview. Do you ever feel, because we're talking about conflict and books about conflict, the one thing that breaks my heart really is that human beings don't seem to learn from past mistakes, and we kind of keep repeating this circle of conflict. And I know this sounds absolutely woo-woo and crazy, but I would love to live in a world where we're a little bit more harmonious with each other and a little bit less willing to drop the bomb on somebody else because they're different from us or they think a different way of it. With each new conflict, do you ever get to a point where you sort of think, oh, again? Not again? Yeah. Seriously? We're going through this again?
Well, the most recent one, that's on everybody's mind is the Israeli conflict, Palestinian conflict. And I keep thinking back, how did this get to this? When the UN did what they did in, I guess, 1947, 1948, establishing a state of Israel, they really didn't think it through properly. And I think if they would have really looked at what would have taken to have a two-state solution, a free Palestine and a free Israel, then when it was all kind of in a mix, maybe we wouldn't be where we are right now. Mm-hmm. And again, that's looking back, hopefully someone's looking back and realizing that we should have done this a little bit differently, and learning from that. But you're right, it's here we go again. Here we go again. To me, it boils down to what has been described as tribalism. We're all part of a tribe, and if you're not part of my tribe, you're the other. And if you're the other, you're not the same as me. And there must be something wrong with you, or you don't believe like I believe, or your religion's different, or whatever. And unfortunately, it just keeps repeating itself. Whether it be in the conflicts in Africa, whether it's in the Middle East, even in this country, the United States, there's a lot of issues, whether it be race, religion, and our government is so polarized that they can't get a consensus for anything. It's always 50-50, and the votes, and so I don't know. Here we are again, doing the same things over and over again. You know?
Yeah.
It doesn't help when other countries stick their little fingers into your conflicts and stir things up. And,
Exactly.
because with the recent with the conflict between the Israelis and Hamas in Gaza, I mean it's known it's being funded by Iran and Russia. So and all the division in the United States as well. Russia's had their little fingers in the pie. So I don't know. It's as Melanie said, we all want to live in a nice, peaceful, beautiful world. And of course, today we're talking about war and conflict and atrocities. And there's Melanie sitting in her peace, love T-shirt, trying to bring positivity to this world.
Yeah.
Well, someone has to do it. So more power to you, Melanie.
Exactly. That's what I think. Sometimes I wish I could get up on a big platform, the top of the world, and just say to all these people, for goodness sake, play nicely.
Yeah.
We've been there, we've done that. It didn't end well for anybody. Let's just share our resources, be nice, and actually you'll all get on a lot better. Thank you very much. There you go. My statement for world peace.
Well, the people that are promoting conflict get all the press, but there are a lot of people around in every country that's trying to, it thinks like you and is trying to do the right thing. And hopefully it'll all work out.
Right, now we're going to drag your mind out of the mire of atrocities and war and conflict, and we're going to tap into your creative side, Walter. And Melanie is going to play a little game with you. And there are no right or wrong answers here. Just say what comes into your mind. Just throw it out through your mouth.
Sure. I'm going to ask you to pick a card. If you watch my finger, I'm going to run my fingers along my cards. And when you say stop, we'll pick a card.
Stop.
All right, let's have a look. What did we pick? What value are we going to talk about? Let's have a look. Oh, this is a good one. All our guests picked really good cards for the things that we've been talking about. And you picked relationships.
Oh.
So we're going to ask you creatively, of course, about the value of relationships. So, Walter, thinking about relationships, I'm going to ask you, what do relationships mean to you? What do they look, feel, and sound like?
Well, I think whether it be family relationships or business relationships, it's important to develop them in a way that people trust you and you trust the other person. And that's how you get things done. And perhaps it kind of comes back to what we talked about prior to this. If we trust each other and if we have developed a good relationship, a good working relationship, a good understanding, then we can live in peace. We can get things done, and we can trust each other. I think back to the days when a handshake was enough. When somebody gave you their word, it was their word, and they would do whatever it was that you said or they said they were going to do, and somehow we've lost our way a little bit with that. And I think getting back to understanding what a relationship, the importance of relationships, the importance of keeping your word is, we kind of lost that. And I think to me, that's the importance of developing good relationships and continuing them. What else is there if you can't trust somebody that tells you something, or if they can't trust you?
Yeah, absolutely. What does it feel like if relationship? To me, it feels a bit like a hug. What would you say it felt like?
I think I mean, you know when it works and when it doesn't work. You know when somebody's being elusive or fake or whatever, or they're just telling you something because they think that's what you want to hear. I think it's a good way. It's a good analogy. It kind of feels warm. It feels, this makes sense. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that trust, that relationship is trusting. It is trusting, because as you say, if you can't take people at their word, what's left?
In the military, you probably heard this. It doesn't matter what your color is, what your religion is, or any of that, or where you came from. What matters is I'm going to have your back, and you're going to have my back when it comes right down to it. And so, my experience in the United States military has been that it doesn't. People say it reflects society. In some ways it does, but in many ways it doesn't, because we don't see as much of that kind of things that society we see in society overriding. What we see more so than anything else is working together as a team and being able to trust each other. And if I tell you I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. So that felt good, and that's one of the things about the military I do miss, because even when I go to events, people are very polite. They call you by your former rank, and they're respectful. And among military members, people I've served with many years ago, it's that way. I mean, just they're very caring. Because we grew up in the military that way, and you're kind of programmed that way, to think that way, that you have to trust each other. I wish many times that the rest of society could be as respectful, be as understanding, and have that type of relationship that we soldiers have, military members have. Now, is everybody in the military 100% good? No, of course. But it's a sense you feel, that you can trust that person, to do their job and to do what they need to
you
do.
have to,
and they respect you,
Yeah, because if there's no mutual trust, especially in a military scenario, you could lose your life.
Exactly. And everybody knows that. And so it kind of drives that into the equation,
It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Walter, and thanks so much for coming on the couch with creatives. It's been lovely listening to you, and we could discuss this forever and a day, quite frankly. All the things around the subject matter, but we need to close it down now and say goodbye. And thank you to Melanie for being on the couch with me, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Julie, so much, and Melanie, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and hopefully we can do it again someday.
Oh, that would be lovely, especially if, as I said to Colin, and I know he's working on some film ideas as well at the moment. So you never know, your books may get turned into wonderful feature films, and we shall have you back as a rich and famous movie director.
That would be wonderful.
It would, wouldn't it?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Walter, and my co-host Julie, and thank to our viewers for tuning in and looking at this episode today. But until next time, we'll see you.